nobody sane would think that, oh, our doctors, our own healthcare system are incentivizing children to go through this and just pushing them through the system and creating basically an entire generation of sterilized and traumatized young men and women. Without seeing any evidence, nobody would think that.
Because it sounds like a horror story.
And it is a horror story. It wasn't until about like a year post-op that I started thinking about it. It all hit me at once. All of these epiphanies that this decision came from a place of trauma. Eventually, the fun of being seen as a young man just went away, and it was just another part of my life. It gave me some time to kind of reflect on like the loss of entire parts of my body. It's important to remember that our physicians and our doctors are still just people. They're flawed. It doesn't take a degree to understand that it's wrong to chemically castrate and then mutilate a child.
You'd think that.
Under any circumstances. These are perfectly healthy children who have psychiatric issues and trauma that can be dealt with in a less invasive manner.
Chloe Cole, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be out here.
And you're out here for AmFest.
Yes, I am.
You're speaking at it, correct?
Yeah, I'm speaking this Saturday.
Well, good for you.
Thank you.
So before we jump in, I have a whole bunch of questions for you because you have a unfortunately crazy story. Do you want to give a brief background about who you are and what you do?
I consider myself to be an advocate for the safety of children, especially in regards to the healthcare system and for the rights of parents and families, mostly because of my own experiences with being a detransitioner. I went through a social and medical gender transition between the ages of 12 to 16 after years of going through quite a bit of an identity crisis during my childhood. I was kind of a tomboy. I didn't really feel like I fit in a whole lot with most of my peers for most of my school days. And I had body image issues, partly stemming from a bit of an early puberty that I was going through. And I didn't really feel like I had the confidence to really reach out to people, to the adults around me, or really anybody around me, to talk about these things. But when I found the online transgender community, I thought that I finally found the answer, that I was going to become happy and whole and pursuing a new identity as a young man. And so I actually ended up going through puberty blockers. I took weekly injections of testosterone starting at the age of 13. And at 15 years old, I had a radical double mastectomy to surgically remove my breasts. And it took less than a year for me to realize post-surgery that I wanted to become a mother one day, that I was grieving my breasts, and I wanted to fulfill the feminine role of a wife. And this potentially would be taking all of that away from me. And I didn't need to change anything about myself. My sex was not the problem. My body was not the problem. I was beautiful the way that I was. And I didn't deserve to go through this. So I detransitioned at 16 years old. And since then, I've been speaking publicly about my experiences with the transgender community, with this subset of medicine, and against the use of these procedures for children, because I think that children deserve to be allowed to grow up with their bodies fully intact.
Yeah.
Because you cannot become an adult. You cannot fully enter into adulthood if you don't go through puberty.
I'm really sorry you went through that. I can't imagine. I had my own health issues, and I was doing some background reading about what you went through, and I was like, it's so much worse, what's going on with the trans stuff than people get sick and people have hard childhoods and things, but this is unfair to a level that is evil. It's shocking. It's insane. So thank you for talking about it.
Thank you. It's the fact that it's so crazy and it's so shocking that's allowed this virus to spread as quickly as it has, because nobody sane would think that, oh, our doctors, our own healthcare system, entire states, entire governments are incentivizing children to go through this and just pushing them through the system and creating basically an entire generation of sterilized and traumatized young men and women.
It sounds like a conspiracy theory.
Without seeing any evidence, nobody would think that. And so for years, nobody believed that it was happening, because
Because it sounds like a horror story. It doesn't sound
And
real.
it is a horror story. Nobody wants to think that it's going on, but it's not until really people like me start coming out, talking about the damages to our bodies and things that happened to us at such young ages, start to see really just what's been happening under our noses for decades now.
If you guys aren't on Peterson Academy, you're missing out. There are over 25 8-hour courses on there from people like Vervaeke, Michael Malice, Keith Campbell. My dad has 3 8-hour courses out now, including Nietzsche, Sermon on the Mount, and Intro to Personality, which is excellent. Brian Keating's on there. David Eagleman on brain plasticity just came out, which I love. Go to petersonacademy.com and come in and see what it's like. We have a 7-day money-back guarantee, so you can poke around the website, look at the courses, and get a refund if you want, no strings attached. Any age is welcome. The courses are university level. Thanks, guys. Enjoy the rest of the podcast. So I wanted to just get to know, like, what exactly happened to you to make you start looking in these, like, trans forums? Where you said you were, well, like, anxious, you were a tomboy. I was a tomboy as a kid, too. I had, like, my hair was cut really short in grade 4. I played sports. Like, I hung out with boys. I didn't like school. I didn't like my friends. I was depressed. It was, like, prime target, you know. It was like, and I can remember a bunch of my friends being like, they could have happened to them. Like it could easily happen. So what do you think led you, well, down that path? Was it the school, social media?
I mean, it was a mixture of different things in my life. I felt like I definitely aligned more with my male role models in my life, particularly my older brothers, because they were the ones who mostly were looking after me and the ones who I was closest to in my family. And I didn't really feel like I related a whole lot to like my older sisters, especially, or like the girls at school. I was bullied pretty hard in my early elementary years, up until high school, up until I started high school. And it always felt like there was something that just set me apart from the other kids around me in some way.
You're probably smarter, to be honest.
I'm
not just putting that out there. That can make, there's this huge discrepancy. Like you go to elementary school or high school even, and you associate with everybody that just lives around there, which you never do at any other point in your life. Like you never do that. Eventually you get to a point in your career or something where you're associating with whoever else is kind of at your level. Like my guess is you're probably like significantly brighter, and that was just like, what's going on? Because that definitely alienates people.
That was a part of it. Like I just never felt like I was really on the same level as my other peers. And it was very hard to connect with them, especially the girls my age. I couldn't really understand them very well, to be honest. And at first, like being a tomboy was something that I actually took a bit of pride in. It was something that set me apart from the others, and it had these qualities that they didn't. But eventually, like as I got into middle school, I feel like around that period of your life, socialization becomes more sex-oriented and almost more segregated between the two sexes. Now I couldn't be making friends with boys without being accused of like having crushed on them or like being in a relationship with them. There's actually one time where there was a boy who I was really close friends with, there was somebody who spread a rumor that I was making like weird like sexual comments about him when I wasn't, and our relationship ended up breaking apart because of these rumors I didn't have a chance of defending myself against. It really sucked. I had a lot of things like that happen, and I just never felt like I could defend myself or like find any niche that I could really fit in, especially after moving schools in 5th grade. It was just like I was back at square one after years of struggling to finally find like a community that I could like surround myself with. I finally found friends, and then I had it taken away just after that. So it was like, where is my identity? Who am I to the people around me? It feels like I'm never valued. It feels like nobody ever pays attention to me, and like I'm nobody. And I kept trying to find some means of understanding myself and then being able to have other people understand me. First, I was an artist throughout most of my early years, and I would use making like portraits of other people or like their favorite like comic or their favorite like cartoon characters and such, or celebrities, or making comics as a means of interacting with other kids. And eventually, as we got older, they didn't take as much interest in that anymore. And then I went through, as everybody started going through puberty, eventually, or even before that, I was starting to get exposed in school, mostly through my classmates, to some pretty inappropriate things. I had some very precocious peers who would talk about things like pornography and sex and things that they were seeing like on the computer or on their phones or the movies that their parents would just like let them watch. And I feel like my understanding between the two sexes and of what it means to be a woman, what a woman's worth comes from, started to really take a shift. And it was like, so this is how the boys are thinking about me. This is how they think about women. I don't feel like I'm very pretty. I don't feel like I'm feeling this pressure to become something that I'm not. And there's a standard that I'm trying to hold myself to that I don't want to. Like, I want to escape this. And on the other side of things, interacting with the girls, I would always hear about like how rough puberty is and how scary periods are. And even from older women, these negative messages about things like that we just can't control, like aging and menopause. And every now and then I would even hear like female teachers saying things like, oh, I would never want to have a daughter. I'm glad that I only have sons.
Oh yeah.
All these messages just culminated into me thinking that my femininity and being a woman was just going to be overall a negative experience. And with me already feeling left out from other women, it was like, why would I ever want this? It feels like there's nothing in store for me. And at times, like, I feel like I just would have been happier if I were born male, if I were like my older brothers. But I didn't really actually believe that until I started seeing. You asked if I was exposed to it in school. It wasn't something that was really in the curriculum yet, actually. Which might sound crazy considering that I come from California. I'm from the middle of California, and this was never really part of my schooling. And I graduated just a few years ago. For me, my first real exposure to it was through social media. And it was through communities that were like kind of oriented around my own personal interests that seemed pretty innocent. Just things like illustration or like character design or cartoons or like books or comics that I would read, right? And a lot of the kids in these communities around my age, it wasn't like celebrities who I was following. It was just other normal kids who had a lot of the same, I noticed that they had a lot of the same struggles that I did with like their identity and their body image and being bullied. And yet, once they started talking about trying to become the opposite sex and eventually going into a social transition, like changing their name and pronouns and asking everybody around them to refer to them as such, changing their clothes and eventually going down the medical route, it seemed like they were becoming, like they were happy amongst themselves. And it was like there was this sense of community amongst them that was kind of novel to me in a way. It was like all these different people from different backgrounds are now coming together and bonding over like their shared experiences and especially their shared hardships. And that was something that for pretty much all my life up until that point, I had wished that I had for myself. So subconsciously, I wanted to be a part of that. And I also felt like I was starting to understand myself a little bit more and more through this lens that maybe the reason why I was so different from everybody around me, and especially the girls and women, was that I just wasn't meant to be one of them. The thing that really hooked me was the brain sex theory. I started hearing in the community about how there's this theory that the reason why people develop gender dysphoria or the distress around their sex is because they have brain patterns that are more similar to a member of the opposite sex. Now, this theory has been debunked. It's completely unfounded. But I didn't know that at the time. And to like my little 11, 12-year-old brain, it was like, wow, this makes perfect sense. Now I know why I'm a tomboy. Now I know why I don't feel like I'm one of the other women around me. This is just who I am. And I conceptualized these feelings that I had in my brain as like some sort of neurological condition that I had.
Yeah.
And the trans community is so hell-bent on medicalization. It's really the only option that's ever talked about. So I thought, okay, so there's this condition that I have, and now I have to treat it.
Yeah.
And so the first step in this treatment consists of the social transition, which, as I explained earlier, is it starts with the changing of your name and the way that you present yourself and reintroducing yourself to the people around you. And the first few times I got called like sir and by this new chosen name that I had for myself, it was weirdly exhilarating. It's like this, it's almost like a kind of high that you get from this affirmation in your choice and this new self that you've created. And eventually I came out to my mom and dad after those first few times, and my friends and sometimes even like strangers calling me this, because I thought, okay, this sort of euphoria is a sign that I'm going in the right direction, that I'm going to be happier this way. And when it came to telling my parents, they weren't really sure how to react, actually. It was kind of like they could see that I was at that stage in my life where naturally I was going to try and branch out and try new things in an attempt to develop my identity, right? And they respected that, but they also didn't really know how they could help me. And they knew, obviously, that it wasn't their son. I wasn't a boy. I wasn't transgender. I was their daughter. I was just the way that my mother's womb made me. And perhaps these feelings that I was having came from a place of pain. They could see very easily that it came from some of my mental health issues and some of my social struggles during my school days. And they wanted to help me, but they knew so little about the subjects. They never had to deal with this at all with any of my older siblings. So they decided that they would get the help of mental health professionals to try and see where these feelings would come from and hopefully help me through this, while also just letting me be a kid and not really intervening during this period of my life, just allowing me to grow up. But their expectations were just completely subverted. The first day of therapy, they weren't allowed in. They weren't allowed in the room. They had no idea what was going on or what was actually being talked about during these therapy sessions. And even I expressed to them, like, I'm not satisfied. Like, I don't feel like this is doing anything for me, but I want help. And so they decided that they were going to talk to the psychologists themselves and ask, like, what is going on in her life that's so bad that she wants to change her body and who she is? Why is she already talking about things like going on hormones and all of these other medications and potentially getting surgery? She's far too young for this. Why can't we wait until she's at least legally an adult, and maybe she'll understand herself better later at that point in life? And the responsibility isn't on us to take upon these procedures that she potentially could regret. And as soon as they mentioned regret, the doctors just got on them and said, it's actually quite unlikely that she's going to regret this. They cited a vague statistic. It was something like 1 or 2% regret rates that they said or detransition rates. I can't remember what it was. I wasn't even in the room for this, so I couldn't refute any of this. I couldn't refute anything that they were saying. But they said, it's more likely that your daughter is going to regret going through puberty and kill herself than she will ever regret going through detransition or going through transition. And it was like a threat that they were giving my parents.
Yeah.
It was like the threat of life or death for their daughter. They just really drilled this idea into their heads that they could lose their kid's life if they didn't say yes to this, and that this was my only option. A lot of people, they give my parents crap for this, for having signed off on treatment. But I don't blame them at all, because they never wanted this for me. They never wanted me to undergo these procedures. They were doing the best with what they were given.
Yeah, I don't think people understand the weight that physicians carry when they speak to you. You know, like it took me, not to compare our situations again, but it's the best that I have with like surgical stuff. Like I went to surgeons for my ankle that said you need to amputate. And I remember my mom nearly fainting. And they talk to you as if they're 100% certain. They've been trained for 30 years, 20 years, whatever, through residency. You don't know what you're talking about. They know what they're talking about. These are the facts, which is why you need to be so careful about who you go to. And I don't think most people realize that, like, any physician, particularly the ones you were working with or social workers or whatever, like, you don't just talk, they're a person. It, like, at best, they're a person who's been brainwashed into thinking they know everything, which is way more dangerous than like the average person that's at least aware they're not educated on every topic. I'm not a fan of like, not a fan. It's right. So dangerous. It's statistically, it's dangerous. And like people don't realize that. They're like, no, they're trained. Yeah. Trained to not be able to think. Like, so bad.
Right. It's important to remember that our physicians and our doctors are still just people. They're flawed.
Yeah.
And really, it doesn't take a degree to understand that it's wrong to chemically castrate and then mutilate a child
you'd think that
under any circumstances. Like,
yeah.
These are perfectly healthy children who they're dealing with, who have psychiatric issues and trauma that can be dealt with in a less invasive manner.
Yeah.
These children do not need these treatments. The efficacy of these treatments is highly disputed.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, this is an area of medicine, which I can barely call medicine, that is based entirely on ideology. There is no such thing as a successful transition because you cannot actually become the opposite sex. None of these treatments actually made me into a young man. And I was becoming more and more cognizant of that fact the further that I went into it. At first, going on hormones and seeing the changes happen to my body, my face, and sounding and looking more like a young man, and eventually going to my high school years being treated as a young man was exciting. It was novel. It was just a completely new experience. And now that I was basically starting my social life from square one, and I could rebuild myself in this identity. And I was entering into male social spaces, and I can't even lie. It was kind of a fun experience, just like being one of the guys and getting to be in that dynamic. And there were times when it was pretty validating that, you know, I wasn't half bad looking at the time. You know, I looked like pretty much any other 15-year-old boy, except I probably groomed myself better. So I had a bit of an appeal to like the other girls my age, and a lot of them like actually had crushes on me. Like I would have girls who would like come up to me, or, like flirting with me, and it was like I'd never had anything like that before. And like I'm completely straight, but in a sense, like I was kind of like climbing up the female social ladder in a really strange way. Like I was kind of exiting like out of all the unhealthy dynamics, but like I'm a woman. So I understood like all the like I understood like what gets girls.
Oh, it's so dark.
So it was like
it's so dark, but yeah.
Like I had the looks of a young man, but I also had like the natural feminine essence of a woman. And I feel like when you're a girl that age, like you're kind of attracted more to softer men.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, that makes sense.
Eventually though, like I started realizing, wait, this is like actually like, I'm not attracted to these women. It's more of a nuisance than anything at this point. And my actual dating pool is like really small. Like the men who I was interested in never returned feelings, obviously, because I looked like a guy. They're straight. It didn't matter that I was actually a woman. But the men who were would often... There's a term, tranny chasers, for people who have like a fetish for like transgender people. And I got a lot of people who were like that. Like I passed pretty well as the opposite sex, and for the most part, like nobody other than like the people I went to like elementary and middle school with knew that I was actually a woman. But upon like realizing this, I would have some people saying like, I could tell that they had some really gross intentions. They didn't like me for me. They didn't value me as a human being. I was just a fetish, something for them to throw away. And I attracted like a lot of pedophiles during this time. Like there were a lot of grown men online, and even like people like who like just graduated from school while I was in my freshman year, like even while I was still in middle school, who were like trying to go after me. It was horrible. And with the influence of the testosterone, unfortunately, I did fall into some pretty unfortunate circumstances. So as women, we have these instincts around our sexuality. We're made to be the more choosy sex in terms of our partners and who we court and marry or choose to have sexual relationships with, because we carry most of the reproductive burden. Now, when you put a woman on testosterone, well, it's a sex hormone, so obviously it's going to change her behavior, her way of thinking, and her sex drive. With those instincts completely melted away from me, and with the intense high sex drive, like I was constantly, it made it so that sex basically became like a hyperfixation for me. And like all of my friends during this time were like hypersexual and like already getting to relationships or like hooking up, and I felt like I had to like play catch up with them. I thought like, because of the culture, the hypersexual culture that I was growing up in, that I was inferior for not partaking in that.
Yeah.
That being said, like there were times when it got really close, and like I was actually being groomed by adult men on the internet who were like planning to like physically meet up with me in my hometown, and even like rent out hotels for a day.
Oh my gosh.
It was horrible.
What are these forums? Is this just like on regular social media, or is this
this was on on regular social media, yes. Primarily Instagram. I even had like some older friends who were like sending like men my way.
Yeah.
It was just a horrible situation that I was in. I could have gotten seriously hurt. I could have gotten trafficked for all I know. I thank God that, I mean, it was already kind of a traumatic thing to happen for me. But the fact that nothing actually happened, that I wasn't actually taken advantage of physically, I'm very thankful of. But I started to realize the toll that all this was taking on me as I got older.
Yeah,
reflecting on not only like how ballsy it made me, what with these experiences with being groomed by adult men, and also like the changing dynamics socially. Eventually the fun of being seen as a young man just went away, and it was just another part of my life. And I feel like young men these days have it pretty rough. It can be very lonely to be a young man if you don't have like a community around you, if you're not going to church, if you don't have a spiritual or communal anchor in your life. And I didn't. like it was already unnatural that I was trying to fulfill this role that I wasn't made for. But just being in that dynamic, I think has given me perspective on how hard men have it these days, which I feel like isn't really talked about enough. There is the male loneliness epidemic is a very real thing. And I saw it not only through my own experiences, but also with a lot of my male friends as well. They felt like they had nobody who they could talk to. A lot of them were suicidal, and they felt like at the end of the day, like there was nobody who they could truly connect with on a person-to-person level, and that they were alone despite being surrounded by a bunch of people.
Do you have any idea, does social media play a role there? Like you're younger than, I saw that a bit like when I was in school, but social media really had nothing to do with it until I was in about like grade 10 or 11, which was good. But I saw it. There were kids with mental health problems and like cutting themselves, stuff like that. Like I saw that, but it wasn't, I don't know, it wasn't common. I think I knew one kid really that like, or two or three maybe, that had like really trouble. Was it like higher when you were in school?
I mean, almost all my friends at the time had some sort of mental health issue.
That's
and a lot of them, like,
crazy.
I'd say probably about half of them had experienced suicidal ideation at some point in their lives or had attempted suicide even.
Oh my gosh.
And
that's insane.
It's not natural.
Oh,
this
no.
is not the
When
environment. This is not the way that children should be growing up.
How old are you?
I'm 20 now, so this wasn't too long ago. I was in high school starting 2018.
Okay, I'm 32. So when I was in middle school, I was kind of part of the like edgy, didn't quite fit in, artsy crew. I wasn't part of the like popular crew.
And really, it sucks to be a part of the popular crew, I feel like.
Yeah. You know what? School just sucked. I hated school the whole time. There's rumors all the time. Everyone's a moron. It just sucks. But I think for mental health issues, like I was on antidepressants. I was very depressed. I was the only kid except for one other kid in 70 that I knew that was depressed. And then when I went to an art school, which has more of the like creative, like depressed types, honestly, when it started out, there were like a handful in 500 people. It wasn't common to have a mental problem. I was always kind of like the one that had a weird health issue or something. It definitely wasn't common.
I started out as that in middle school, and then all of a sudden, I think you're right about the influence of social media to an extent. I feel like it creates this on social media, especially on platforms like Instagram, which are very image oriented.
Yeah,
you want to like project like the best parts of your life out, and only the best parts. So what other people are seeing, or when you're looking at somebody else's post, so like their own personal profile, you're just seeing the best of them. You're not seeing that the pain that they go through. They're not seeing like any of their issues or their flaws or their
trauma.
No. So you get the sense of like, so this is how life should be like. I should look like this. I should have a body. I should have a body like this. That was a big thing for me. That was a big part of why I had body image issues that eventually led into me transitioning, was that I grew up in the age of curvy, hourglass, like post Kardashian.
2018 was a rough year, yeah.
Like and you know, like in middle school, I was an adult, obviously, so I wouldn't be fully developed, but also like I was kind of like a skinny, athletic sort of girl. I had like larger shoulders, and it was like, I wish I was bottom heavy. Like I wish I looked more like other women. Like I feel like I look like a teenage boy just looking at myself in the mirror. And I feel like I'm never going to match up to this. And I think that extends into issues other than like body image for women. Like you're seeing like just this almost unhealthily like positive and happy image of other people's lives. Mm-hmm. And it's also very isolating too. Social media and really just our smartphones have made it so that we've become more comfortable interacting when we're not face to face.
Yeah. I know. It's weird. I can't imagine, like, we had something, I don't know if you've heard of MSN, but it was called MSN. It was just a messaging app, and that came out.
I vaguely remember that. Yeah. I don't think I wasn't old enough for that. But
I had that in grade I don't know, like middle school, maybe, I think it was middle school. And I remember just being like, wow, this is amazing. I can't imagine having something like Instagram in middle
It's
school.
very overstimulating.
Oh my gosh.
It's incredibly
like, what
overstimulating.
a nightmare. Yeah. Ugh. I don't envy that.
Yeah, I looking back on my childhood and my adolescence makes me want to avoid two things for my kids: public schooling and social media. I've basically been in front of a screen for as long as I can remember. And the environment of public school was, I don't feel like, especially for kids who are kind of like, who tend to think outside the box, who tend to be more creative and tend to be more out there, the school doesn't care about you. And they don't care about parents either. They don't care about what the needs of not only the child, but also the family. And if you're not listening to the parents, then you genuinely can't help the child who's your student.
Yeah.
Like outside of the whole trans thing, like I had an IEP plan. It's not quite special ed, but it's just like a different, like an individualized. It's short for an individualized education plan, and they ignored all of my accommodations for it, to the point that eventually it was just like completely absent by the time that I was in my senior year.
Yeah. That's not surprising. It's bad. I think, I don't know if public school is good for anybody, but it's not as bad for some people. If you do think outside the box or you're a little bit different, then you end up, like this happened to me a bit. I ended up associating with like the most troubled people because they were more interesting. And that's just a bad idea. It was like just a bad idea. Like,
I mean, the same ended up happening with me when I was in high school, and I ended up getting into things like substances and just doing things that I shouldn't have. And I feel like I started doing things that I wouldn't have normally, not only because of peer influence, but also because of the fact that I was on testosterone, which it just radically changed my personality. I became pretty ballsy. Like I was like, now, like I was just trying to like test every limit that I possibly could. And I was, by the time that like I was like halfway through high school in my sophomore year, like I was just in a really bad place. I wasn't paying attention to my studies anymore. Like I was completely checked out of life, basically just like skating by, getting high, doing nothing with myself. And as I fell further and further into this sort of bottomless pit, it felt like I started wondering again, like, why aren't I happy anymore? Like I'm being put on this path that I was told by doctors, an entire community of people who are just like me, was going to make me happy. So what's the issue? So I started ruminating again. I started thinking like, okay, I need to figure out what it is and get it fixed. I started feeling insecure about my body again after years of being on testosterone and not really thinking about it anymore. And when I looked down at my body, my breasts were still there. I was already like a few years into puberty, and like I was fairly developed for a girl my age before I started on the hormones and the treatments. So I had to like use this, like they call it a binder. It's kind of like a tank top, but it's made out of like it's a compression garment basically that like smushes down the breasts. Sounds comfortable, right?
Yeah, no.
And I would wear this every day whenever I'd go out like into school, or whenever we'd have guests over, to make it look like I didn't have breasts. But it's like at the end of every day, like I would take a shower after school, and I would see that this part of my body that I was deeply insecure about was still there. And so I thought, well, maybe the issue is that I have to go on to the next step. Surgery.
Yeah.
I need surgery. I don't want to be wearing this uncomfortable device anymore. I want to be free. I want to be able to not have to change out in the restroom. I want to be able to hang out with my friends with my shirt off during pool parties and stuff. I had this like elaborate fantasy of what life would be like if I had a flat chest. And I told my doctors about all this, and the conveyor belt that I was on started moving again towards surgery. And it was a pretty straightforward process. I think that the meetings with my doctors about this started when I was roughly about 14, and then I finally went under the knife when I was 15. So it was about a year long, and the only reason why surgery got pushed back was because of the whole COVID thing with all the lockdowns in California and everything. But I had surgery during lockdowns, actually, during the time where they were pushing people away for elective surgeries that would improve quality of life. And yet I was being operated on during this time.
Oh, that's worse.
For my completely healthy breasts. And that was when the regret started, actually. That was when my entire attitude around my transition started to shift completely. I started noticing that my body image issues were coming back. And this is during a point in my life where I was like basically completely socially isolated and always just in my room because of the quarantining procedures. I couldn't go to school physically and like see my friends in person, which is very emotionally painful for me already.
Yeah.
And it felt like I was going insane. Yeah. But I also feel like it gave me some time to kind of reflect on like the past few years of my adolescence up until that point, and this major decision that I had just entered into, and like the loss of entire parts of my body, which the post-op process was hell. It was horrible. Like, not just physically, like looking down at the scars and like having to take care of the wounds, but also reflecting on the fact that I had just lost major parts of my sexuality. And I didn't realize that at the time, but that was actually exactly what I was running away from. I had those experiences with being groomed by adult men online. But I had also been molested a few times throughout my childhood, and I think the scariest instance of that happening was when I was in 8th grade, and there was a boy who came up to me who had been bullying me throughout the school year. Everybody just looked the other way. And it was so obvious where it was going to lead. He would talk to other people. He would make sexual comments about me to my face. He would spit on me. He would like push me and try to trip me. And eventually one day he just came up to me. And the classroom was full. There were other people there. People had to have seen it. And he reached for my chest, and he squeezed, and he twisted my breast. And he looked me in the eye as he did it. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't move or anything afterward because I was just in so much shock. But this was early on in my transition, so I was already in the mindset of like, I'm a young man. So it was like, who can I tell about this? How am I going to be taken seriously as a man if I'm like screaming for help or like, the school already was not paying attention to me at all. I was being neglected with my educational plan. So it was like, why would I ever go up to them and report this? And I just thought, I gotta man up. I just have to man up and forget about this. And for years, I repressed that pain and the trauma of that. I didn't realize how much it affected me, or that was actually one of the things that was pushing me to run away from my femininity. It wasn't until about like a year post-op, or less than a year actually, after that happened, that I started thinking about it. And I realized this decision came from a place of trauma. I never had to do this.
That's super self-aware for, what were you at that point?
16? I was 16, yes.
Yeah.
And I also, this was around the same time that I was taking a psychology class, and I was learning for the first time about like family dynamics and how children mature from basically from birth up until the age of 18 in terms of like how they socialize and their psychology. And that too was a big part of what led to me detransitioning. During appointments for all three of the major interventions, the blockers, the hormones, and the surgery, I would hear about either, in very vague terms, about how I potentially could have changes to my fertility.
Oh, that's nice.
Or about the fact that I could lose my ability to breastfeed. But it was like, I want to be a man. Like, if I'm a man, why would I give birth? Why would I want to walk around with a pregnant belly while like having like an otherwise like masculine looking appearance? Why would I want to breastfeed when that's not what a father does? And I even told them, like, I don't want to have kids because I was between the ages of 13 to 15.
Yeah.
A kid that age should not be thinking about having children of their own.
Yeah.
Because they're still very much growing up. And I think just before my junior year ended, it all hit me at once. All of these epiphanies that I wanted to have children of my own one day that potentially could have been taken away from me forever before I even became an adult. And that this entire decision was being driven by trauma, that I was running away from my real problems. It killed me. I didn't know what to do with myself, but I just knew that I had to escape. I couldn't continue doing this.
Like, what was it like for you to like realize that and then overcome it and then start speaking about it? How long did it take you to start talking about it after you kind of had this realization and detransitioned?
The crazy thing is that it was probably only about a year between stopping transition and me publicly speaking.
I guess that's not that crazy when you think about it, because you're like, I have to make sure this isn't happening to anyone else.
Right. And when I first detransitioned, I didn't think that I had like the rest of my life to live. I didn't think that I had a future. I was like starting to like plan out my suicide even.
Aww.
I was like passively suicidal for most of my days, just like not really taking care of myself, not paying attention to school or my studies. And I was just completely broken down during that time. I'd lost everything that I had known. This community, the support of my doctors, my health, my beauty, years of my childhood, and even my friends at school. The people around me, I mean, other than like my family, a lot of them were just abandoning me now because they didn't know what to do with me. The trans community, like I went from like being held in the highest regard, being celebrated for surgery and for passing as the opposite sex, and then just losing that all, being told that I was a traitor, that I should have known better.
Wow.
That it was all my fault, and just getting completely kicked out without really saying it. And I tried to connect with them. I tried my best to like make amends with them and try to like skirt around the subject and walk on eggshells with them. I couldn't do it. But that was actually one of the things that pushed me into starting to speak out publicly. It made me think like, if I'm being treated this way just for talking about the things that happened to me and for talking about grief, talking about regret, something that I can't help, something tells me that I should continue to do so. And the hatred kind of propelled me forward in some weird sense.
Yeah.
It was very painful to deal with at the time, you know, because I was like a little freshly traumatized 16-year-old girl who didn't really have much. But I figured that maybe if I keep going, there's going to be a light at the end of the tunnel. And then I discovered that there were other men and women out there who had been through the same thing, who had been through transition and came out not only with regret, but like parts of their bodies missing and their health compromised forever. And also I had a niece and a nephew just come to the world at that point in time. And it was like, it just completely changed my perspective. It made me reflect, just being with them and helping to take care of them and seeing their little beautiful innocent faces was like, this is what I had ripped away from me at a young age. How could I be quiet about this? I can't stand for this. I can't just be quiet. I feel like I have a responsibility to speak up about what happened to me and to try it and get my shit together and pick up the pieces of my life as much as I can to help advocate for children. Not just the people like me, but for the potential children who could be sucked into this. Because my generation deserves better, and the generations that come after mine deserve so much better than the identity crisis that we're currently in right now. And so I started speaking out at the age of 17. And I was still in high school at the time. I think I had dropped out. I had just dropped out. I was about to take my proficiency certificate exam at the time that I started. It started with a Twitter account. Back when X was called Twitter.
Yeah.
Back before the big change and Elon taking over. And I hope that maybe I would accumulate like maybe 1,000 followers and that whoever would see it would be helped by it. Whether it was one child or even if they weren't a child, even if they weren't personally dealing with this. And all of a sudden I started having a bunch of journalists reaching out to me.
Wow.
And then parents reaching out to me, desperate for help with their kids who are going through the exact same thing. And then I was being asked to testify in front of the legislature. And I had to beg my parents to say yes. Thank God that they did. It took a lot of convincing for them because, you know, like I'm their baby, and I was still a kid at the time. I was still a minor. So they were like, no way. We are not going to send you all the way like halfway across the country. We're not going to just have you go without us. But then I started to see how much this meant to me, and that this is an opportunity for me to be able to pick my life back up and to use like everything that we had been through as a family for the greater good. Yeah. And it's led to everything that's happened in the past 2 years up until now. Like, since I've started speaking out, a bunch of other detransitioned men and women and families and even like whistleblowers in like the medical community have come out. And a lot of legislative and cultural change has come about the past few years. And I think it just speaks to the beauty of grassroots movements. I feel like people have telling the truth. They become so. I feel like a lot of people these days. Part of the reason why there's such a wave of depression is that people feel like they have no power, like their voice means nothing, like they're just beholden to corporations and a government that holds all the power above them. Yeah, that's not true. I used to feel the exact same way about myself. I used to believe that I was always going to be a nobody, that I would never have any power in my life. Yeah. But what it took for me to get to this point was just putting myself out there and facing all my biggest fears. I never thought that I would be publicly speaking. I was quite a shy kid, and I was kind of a shut-in at the time that I started speaking out, you know. But if you put yourself out there, if you step outside, if you push yourself to just be as part of the world, you can make huge strides not only in your own life, but also in the lives of the people around you.
That, and if you tell the truth. Like
the
people,
truth. There's nothing more important than the truth.
Yeah, or powerful.
It's not in living and speaking the truth. It's not going to make your life any easier. But that's the beauty of it. It's the hardship that makes seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, that makes the fruit of your labor so much more worth it. Mm-hmm. Because in doing anything important, you're going to face a lot of hardship. But that's just life. Yeah. Life isn't supposed to be easy. Yeah. Agreed. And I mean, I've faced a lot of difficulties in doing this. I spend a lot of time away from my family because of all the travel and because of just the busy nature of my work. And it sucks at times. And even like during events, like I get sometimes I get big protests, and sometimes I get people who are trying to threaten my personal safety. I've had people threaten to rape or assault or kill me. I've had people going after my family and harassing them over social media or over like finding like their emails or like mailing them stuff. But it's all been so worth it, because some of the greatest experiences that I've had while doing this have been the ones where I've met the other men and women, or sometimes they're still just boys and girls who have been through what I have, or have been through even just through other similar traumatic experiences, coming up to me and thanking me for speaking out and telling me that in doing so, it's helped them to find healing, to find personal growth. I mean, it's just been such a beautiful thing to go through, and it's been such an honor to be able to do all this. And really, I don't feel like my experience is just my experience. Obviously, like I've met there are a lot of detransitioners out there now who have been through the process of detransition. But this is just, I feel like, an extreme outcome of the identity crisis that young people are growing up in these days.
Yeah. Well, you do a very good job of bringing the gravity to the situation. Like, I think when you hear about these things and you don't know somebody that this ideology has impacted personally, it just doesn't, it sounds bad, but you don't know. It's like when you hear somebody has cancer or something, you don't know like what that does to a family, right? But you're good at explaining kind of the personal element to it.
And really, people don't realize that in some way this is affecting them. Like, I've been to so many different communities all across the country and even abroad now. I've been to a bunch of different churches, legislatures, and other communities and schools. And at pretty much every place that I've been to, I've had like entire lines of people coming up to me asking me for help, either with like their own feelings of dysphoria around themselves or their struggles with transitioning or wanting to do so or coming back out of it, or family members, especially parents who don't know what to do with their children who are struggling with these feelings.
What do you tell them? What do you tell? Yeah, okay, that's we should definitely address that. What do you tell parents who are trying to deal with a kid who has gender dysphoria, or is confused or considering transition?
When you have a kid who's going through this, you have to be very controlled. You have to be very measured in the way that you respond to them. Because whether you realize it or not, depending on where you're at, your local government, the healthcare system, or even your child's school could all be stacked up against you. You have to be the one not only to tell them no, because you cannot affirm this, because in doing so, you're ceding ground to this idea that the way that they were made is wrong. And no child deserves to believe that. But you have to show them that this doesn't mean anything, that they are not actually the opposite sex, and you are not going to regard them as such. You can't overreact or underreact, because your child is looking for some sort of boundary or reaction. They're expecting you to either just say yes to everything that they're saying, or to be angry at them to push them away further. But there's a middle ground. You can say no. And depending on your child, you know your child best. So you might be able to see right away where these feelings exactly are coming from for them. Mm-hmm. And helping them build their identity in other ways. Because children, especially once they reach like the preteen stage, they'll think that like their identity is built off of like the way that they look or like the name that they call themselves. And it's not unusual for children to experiment with their presentation, or even with like different names. Like between the ages of like, I'd say like 10 to 14. And I think that you can allow your child to maybe dress differently, but you cannot refer them by the name of the opposite. But you cannot refer them by a different name or by like the pronouns or as the opposite sex. I'm getting really off track here. I don't know.
No, it's okay. Do you just suggest people don't how seriously do you have to take this? Could you be a parent and just say,
the trans
that's not true. Try and figure out why they're thinking this way. I'm not going to refer to you that way. No, but kindly. Or do you get to the point where you have a battle? If they're completely convinced? I can't imagine. I can't imagine being in that situation at all.
Depending on the situation, and every child and every family is individual, right?
Yeah.
It's probably somewhere in the middle, but you have to figure out where this is coming from, where the source is coming from, whether it's from school, whether it's from the internet, or if it's coming from their peer group, and then you act accordingly. If it's coming from their school curriculum, you might as well be taking them out of school and either moving schools or starting to homeschool them, which I know isn't an option for every single family, but I think it's the best option possible because you have total control over your child's curriculum and what they're learning, and also their learning environments which you can't really get with public schooling or even private schooling, really. But at the end of the day, you cannot allow this to consume all of your time with your child. You have to be able to have a normal parent-child relationship with them and still be able to relax and enjoy time with them as you would as their mother or father. You have to be that safe, comfortable place for them to be. And you should be asking, why do you feel this way? Where are these feelings coming from? And telling them, no, you cannot actually become the opposite sex. This is something that's going to hurt you.
Yeah, that's not
true. But I'm always going to love you the way that you were made, and you are beautiful, and you don't have to change that.
That makes sense. Well, Chloe, I would love to talk for longer, but I can't. Otherwise, I would. I'm going to have to get you back. Maybe we'll do another podcast next year if you have time.
I'd love to.
That was really your stories. I don't know. It's just so sad. I'm so glad that you're talking to people about it and changing so many people's lives, because then all the suffering you went through and everything and the repercussions you continually have to deal with. At least you have people coming up to me being thank you for saving me. That's good.
Seeing the impact that this movement that I've been a part of has made everything just so incredibly worth it.
Yeah.
And, it's not easy to come out of it or to do what I'm doing. I still have lasting repercussions with my health, but I'm getting better every day. And all I have to do is keep pushing.
Yay. Well, congratulations on, getting through that and realizing what you realized at such a young age. That's an incredible age to have self-awareness when you're when that's going on. So good for you for talking about it, the audience you've grown and trying to put an end to this because it's insane. So yeah, congratulations on everything. Good luck. Where can people, if they don't follow you, where should they go to follow you online?
Thanks for asking. I'm on X and I'm also on Instagram as well as YouTube. And my username on all three of those is CHOOO. That's 3 O's. COLE. Chukole. Or you also could find me by looking up Chloe Cole. If I'm not shadow banned.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, thank you, Chloe, and I will see you at AmFest.
See you at AmFest.